We live in a post-truth society where objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than personal belief. The promise of the internet has failed humanity. Or perhaps humanity has failed the promise of the internet. The world is flooded with false information and people are drinking it up. I can pull out my phone and find hundreds of hours of evidence that the Earth is flat, just as quickly as I can look up the complete works of Aristotle. This is a problem that threatens the very foundations of human civilization. Hello Adobe Max, my name is Dan Stiles, and I'm a designer and illustrator in Portland, Oregon. And if you've ever seen me speak before, you might be wondering, why am I talking about this? Normally I get up here and I talk about the nuts and bolts of creativity. I talk about my work, my clients, design theory, creative thinking, small business. However, the world is anything but normal right now. I can't be the only one who's noticed that America is coming apart at the seams, and the divisions are getting wider by the minute. Why can't Americans see eye to eye? What mechanisms are driving us apart? And what role does design and messaging play in all of this? As disseminators of information, are we part of the problem or part of the solution? My interest in our current situation was actually spurred by this image, shared by an acquaintance on Facebook. As a designer, poster nerd, and believe it or not, sociology major, it immediately struck me how similar the meme was to this classic piece of propaganda from the First World War. And once I had opened that box, I began seeing parallels everywhere. We are literally inundated with propaganda on a daily basis. Not in the form of posters, but in the form of memes. They look different, they're certainly less pretty, and they come from different sources, but the messaging and the tactics are exactly the same. America is in the grips of a massive psyops campaign, and it's tearing us apart. And so we're here today to talk about meme warfare, which is actually a real term. NATO defines it as information operations and psychological warfare conducted through the internet and social media. But in order to fully understand what that means for our society, we need to answer several questions. The first is, what exactly is a meme? The term was originally coined in 1976 by Richard Dawkins, the Nobel Prize-winning evolutionary biologist, in his book, The Selfish Gene. And it's important to note that the original definition had nothing to do with cats, cheeseburgers, or the internet. A meme, as defined by Dawkins, is a unit of cultural information that's spread by imitation from person to person. A meme could be an idea, a phrase, a dance move, anything that spreads virally through a group of people. This is how buzzwords spread through an office, or fashion spreads through a high school. However, over the last decade, the term meme has been hijacked. Now most people understand it as a unit of information in the form of a humorous image that is copied, often with slight revisions, and spread virally over the internet. Now I would argue that both definitions are in fact correct. Information is viral. Memes are an information carrier, and the internet is a great vehicle for rapid cultural dissemination. But if information is viral, what happens when that information is malicious? In other words, what happens when memes are weaponized? Now before we can answer that, we need to step back even further and ask, well, what is information? Simply put, information is facts or details about something. But that definition downplays its importance. Information is the currency of the human mind. Language, farming, medicine, tools, architecture, literally everything we do as modern humans is based on information passed to us by others. Without information, we go back to living in trees. Information is critically important to humanity, but sometimes we get it wrong. And when information is incorrect and shared accidentally, we get misinformation. For instance, bad directions to the gas station. Or when your grandmother sends you this little gem, which suggests that you point a blow dryer down your throat to kill the coronavirus. Or anything posted by that guy you kinda knew in high school who wants everyone to know that weed cures everything. These people are spreading misinformation, but without malice. On the other hand, when information is incorrect or misleading and then deliberately shared, we get disinformation, which comes from the Russian word desinformatia, which they describe as false information with the intention to deceive public opinion. For instance, this example from the 2016 presidential election, which shows Hillary Clinton shaking hands with Osama bin Laden. The post is a fabrication, and the photo has been doctored. The original shows Clinton shaking hands with an Indian musician when she was a US Senator in 2004. The account that posted it, Heart of Texas, was one of hundreds of fake social media accounts created by the Russian government. The page had 250,000 followers by the time it was taken down, and its ads had been viewed over 10 million times. In addition to misinformation and disinformation, there's also malinformation. This is information which is, in fact, true, but with omissions or cherry-picked in such a manner as to weaponize it. For instance, using leaked information to harm a political or business opponent, such as the hack on a DNC server in 2016. Once in possession of private information, the hackers released the most embarrassing and damaging bits at key points in the election. Or the very real video of Nancy Pelosi that was then altered to make her sound like she was slurring her words. Our information ecosystem is now so polluted that there's a term for it: information disorder. In a recent survey, 86% of global internet users admit to having been duped by false information, and the remaining 14% probably just never figured it out. So what happens when we have an information society with an information economy, and that information is increasingly corrupt? Well, then we no longer live in the information age. Instead, we live in the propaganda age. Propaganda is the use of misleading or false information to promote a particular point of view. A society built on propaganda is no longer a society based on fact and truth. Shared objective reality ceases to exist. Instead, society is ruled by opinion and allegiance to a cause, much like sports rivalries, but elevated to civic life. The first thing to know about propaganda is that it is not a style. Most people hear the term and immediately think of red and black posters from communist regimes of Cold War Russia or China, a style that is now used to sell home decor and t-shirts at the mall. No, propaganda is actually a well-worn set of nearly 100 techniques devised to influence how people think. Each one is fascinating, and if we had more time, I'd go through them all. However, for today, I'm going to focus on the 8 most popular in meme warfare. First and foremost is dehumanization, making people from other nations, ethnic groups, or with differing viewpoints appear to be subhuman. This is a classic technique to divide people, or to make it okay to take their life, as they were never really human to begin with. This technique almost always leverages some combination of xenophobia, classism, racism, or sexism. Similar to dehumanization is ad hominem, calling someone names in place of arguing an actual point. It's playground bully level stuff, but incredibly effective. Next, we have ad nauseum, the tireless repetition of an idea, especially a slogan. The concept is that if the idea is repeated often enough, it becomes the truth. Corporations excel at doing this. Advertising and propaganda actually use many of the same techniques. The only difference is that one tries to change what you buy, while the other tries to change what you believe. Although recently, that wall has collapsed. The best recent example of ad nauseum is Make America Great Again, which is also an excellent example of the glittering generalities technique, where emotionally appealing words are applied to a product or an idea, but present no concrete argument or analysis. Related to ad nauseum is the big lie, a term that was actually coined by Adolf Hitler in 1925 in his manifesto Mein Kampf and widely used by the Nazis. The idea is to tell a lie so colossal that no one believes that anyone would have the guts to tell a lie so large, so it must be true. For instance, birtherism, which baselessly questioned whether President Barack Obama was a U.S. citizen. Floated first in 2008 and later picked up by Donald Trump, by 2017, 42% of Republicans believed that President Obama was born in Kenya. Appeal to fear is exactly what it sounds like. The technique builds support by instilling anxieties and panic in the intended audience. Transfer or association is the technique of transferring positive or negative qualities between two unrelated items. Used extensively in both propaganda and advertising. Patriotism and rationing food. Manliness and cereal, Obama and Islam, Jesus and Donald Trump. In the fire hose of falsehoods technique, a large number of messages are broadcast rapidly, repetitively, and continuously over multiple channels without regard for truth or consistency. The propagandist overwhelms the public by producing a never-ending stream of misinformation and falsehoods. The goal is to confuse, not to convince. This technique was perfected by Vladimir Putin in Russia. Most of these memes actually peddle in multiple techniques at once, overlapping and nesting. For instance, the Trump meme uses association between Trump and Uncle Sam, appeal to fear that they are after you, The big lie, which is that there's a them in the first place. Cult of personality, which is where an individual uses mass media to create an idealized or heroic public image. And also loaded language, using words and phrases with strong emotional implications to influence the audience. So at this point, we know that disinformation is false information created with the intention to deceive. We know that disinformation is viral, memes are the carrier, and the internet is the vehicle. We also know that propaganda techniques are employed to trick us into believing this disinformation. But what we haven't addressed yet is how this disinformation has managed to disrupt our society so quickly and profoundly. If propaganda has always been around, why is this most recent incarnation so effective? To address that, we need to look at how the free press in a democracy is structured. Back in the pre-internet, pre-cable news days, the media functioned very differently than it does now. Let's say you had an event, a fire, a natural disaster, an election, anything newsworthy. Surrounding that event would be facts, falsehoods, open questions, little bits of information and misinformation. And it was the media's job to collect and strain this information, sorting truth from falsehood, and then reporting those facts to their audience, which was made up of all Americans. Everyone watched the same 3 news channels. And this was a one-way system. Information was collected at one end, verified, and then facts were broadcast. Say what you want about the mainstream media, but they are critical to the functioning of any democracy. The free press is the first thing autocrats eliminate upon taking power in order to stop the flow of independently verified information. It's hard to lie all the time if someone's fact-checking you. Now, if you were an outside actor, like a government, a corporation, or anyone with an interest in controlling how people thought about this event, you had 2 choices. You could 1, issue your own information or disinformation about the event, perhaps through a press conference, a statement, or a leak. But this information would still be run through the media veracity machine before it was reported. Or you could create your own media that you share directly with the people. This is the source of so much of the printed propaganda that we're familiar with. If the free press was doing its job, it was very difficult for egregiously bad information to be widely disseminated in a system like this. Now let's say we have that same event in our current system. The same bits of information surround it, and that same media structure is still there, filtering information and serving it up, but only to some people. With the explosion of internet and cable news, viewers can now find media outlets that appeal to their existing opinions. These outlets serve up half-truths or in some cases complete fabrications in order to please their viewers, owners, and advertisers. Audiences exist in information silos, hearing only what they want to hear. Now on top of that, add social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, which are all also siloed by personal taste. These platforms allow for unrestricted two-way sharing of information without any independent verification at all. The ability to upload and download disinformation is virtually unlimited in this context. Let's say you're an external actor in this new media environment. Sure, you could release a press release and run it through the media, but why bother? When you could simply go directly to a sympathetic media outlet and reach people that way. Or, better yet, you could skip traditional media altogether and go straight to social media. There you can find the exact silo of people you're looking for and open the floodgates of disinformation into welcoming arms. Then you can sit back and watch users share it amongst themselves, mass replicating and amplifying your message. What makes this situation even worse is that literally anybody can leverage this open system, from large foreign governments to independent internet trolls. So that's pretty much a huge mess. What are we going to do about it? Before we can answer that, we need to know one more thing. How does propaganda work? If we can figure out how it works, perhaps we can figure out how to stop it. Now, it's important to know that nobody is immune to propaganda. While there are some correlations between susceptibility and age, IQ, and education level, don't go thinking you're special. Most propaganda works by leveraging evolutionary traits that every single one of us carry. Traits that served us well in a prehistoric world, but are terrible in our modern life. We evolved as a social species, and as a result, we value group acceptance over empirical truth. And for that reason, we are psychologically wired to look for, interpret, and recall information that reinforces our existing beliefs and prejudices. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. And as if that wasn't enough, when we are presented with information that runs counter to our collective identity, it causes us so much mental anguish that we usually either reject the information outright or attempt to justify our beliefs in such a way as to reduce the discomfort instead of actually examining our beliefs. This is called cognitive dissonance. Any information that doesn't support our group beliefs is seen as an attack on us by them. We refer to this as tribalism, and it's the reason that literally everything in America is now part of the culture war. And we all happily participate in this war by hitting the share button on anything that reinforces our sense of us. Because of our biological disposition towards us versus them, you can easily see why propaganda techniques such as name-calling, dehumanization, and transfer are so effective. Psychological traits that evolved to create group cohesion have been hijacked to promote intergroup hostility. So what do we do? Well, one thing we know is that arguing over the internet or the Thanksgiving table doesn't work. Between cognitive dissonance and what is known as the continued influence effect of misinformation, once people hold a certain belief, it is nearly impossible to change their minds. Stopping misinformation at the source is difficult, as literally anyone can be the source these days. Cable TV news is covered by the First Amendment. Social media companies are resistant to policing disinformation, as they make tons of money off it, and logistically they could never keep up with the volume being produced anyway. This is a bad situation. But there may be an answer. If disinformation is viral, what if we vaccinated against it? This is the simple concept behind the science of pre-bunking. Instead of attempting to debunk already held beliefs, what if we induce preemptive resistance against future disinformation? The basics of pre-bunking are pretty simple. You present people with a warning that a disinformation attempt is going to be made, and you explain the disinformation techniques that might be used. That way, when the attempt comes, people can recognize it for what it is. To use a historical example, let's say a product is found to be outrageously unhealthy. Knowing that the maker of the product was going to fight back against this information, pre-bunkers could have warned people that a disinformation campaign was coming, and that it would use techniques such as fake experts in an attempt to muddy the waters. Looking back, it's easy to see how many lives could have been saved. But how could pre-bunking work in our modern world? An excellent example is an online game called Bad News. Created by Cambridge University researchers, Dutch research firm Droog, and the design agency Gusmanson. In the game, players take on the role of a fake news producer and learn to master the techniques of disinformation. After playing, researchers found that users were on average 21% less likely to believe disinformation. They also showed that those who were most likely to believe propaganda at the outset were the people who benefited most from the inoculation. You can play it yourself at getbadnews.com. Now, I would love to wrap this up in a pretty bow and tell you exactly what you need to do, but the challenge is too large for pithy solutions. So instead, I issue this call to arms. What can you do as an artist, as a designer, as an information architect to help inoculate your fellow citizens against disinformation? Can you help weaponize the truth? Can you harness the power of creativity to work for a common good, rather than just adding to the noise or selling more stuff that people don't need? This battle is being fought on our turf and with our tools. Collectively, we have the unique skills required to turn the tide in the war against truth. The only remaining question is, will we use them?